Hello and welcome back to the HR Leadership Forum. My name is Vicki Lynn Brunskill with Argyle. It's great to have everyone joining us today. Just a couple of notes before I turn things over to our esteemed speaker for this session. First, a quick reminder to stop by our sponsors' virtual booths at any time during today's event and for the following week. Our partners are committed to providing you with valuable content and a great overall experience today. At any time during the event, you can visit their virtual booths from the main agenda page. And to ask questions throughout the session, simply type into the Q&A chat and we'll address your questions at the end of the session. And now, without further delay, I would like to introduce our speaker, Katrin Kaler, Chief Human Resources Officer and Director of Human Resources at the University of California, Los Angeles, UCLA Extension. We are so excited to have Katrin with us for a keynote presentation titled Data-Driven Employee Engagement Strategies. Welcome, Katrin, and over to you.
Hello, good morning to everybody on the West Coast, or good afternoon to everyone in the East. I am so pleased to be here today at the Argyle Forum, speaking about employee engagement, one of the topics I feel most passionately about in my profession. Thank you for spending some time with me today. So just a quick introduction about myself. Thank you, Vicki Lynn, for the kind introduction. I oversee human resources at UCLA Extension. UCLA Extension is part of the University of California. I personally am an organizational psychologist, which really shapes my view of human resources and people and culture in the organization. I've been in this field for, dare I say, almost 20 years now. Spent the first half of my career in the private sector in Europe. I'm originally from Germany. You might have picked up on a slight accent by now. And for about 10 years now, I've been with the University of California. Now, I'm going to give you a very practical case study presentation today because as an HR practitioner myself, I feel like concrete lived experience, takeaways, recommendations from fellow HR colleagues are oftentimes the most valuable takeaways from events like this one today. So I'm going to share some insights, strategies, and real-world experience today, how we have been able to achieve a turnaround in organizational engagement at Extension. Extension is UCLA's division of continuing adult education. We're a nonprofit organization and we're fairly large. We service approximately 45,000 students a year. We've been around for over 100 years now and have approximately 2,300 employees. As you can imagine, the vast majority of those are our instructors, our teachers who serve our students. I'd like to give you an impression of our situation, our scenario that I walked in when I started my work at Extension in 2018. I stepped into a scenario that was, to put it mildly, challenging. Only about 6 months prior to my arrival at Extension, the organization has experienced a very turbulent period. Leadership announced widespread layoffs that ultimately never materialized. So you can probably guess what happened. The organization experienced approximately 20% turnover, a disengaged workforce, and a sense of frustration. So picture an organization where uncertainty loomed large, where trust was fragile. Employees were understandably really cautious, and the foundation of employee engagement was weakened. So what did we do in the face of these challenges? We really needed to embark on a journey of transformation. Our strategy was pretty simple but powerful. We needed to focus on talent engagement and retention. We understood that rebuilding trust and rekindling engagement was paramount. In the slides ahead, I'm going to walk you through the concrete steps we took, the strategies we implemented, and the outcomes we achieved as we breathed new life into Extension's workforce. So let's dive into the specifics on how we turn the tide. But before we do that, I would like to take a look at employee engagement, what it is, and how we can define it. The Society for Human Resources Management, SHRM, say that engagement is the extent to which employees feel passionate about their jobs, are committed to the organization, and put discretionary effort into their work. I like this definition. And what particularly stands out to me is the aspect of the discretionary effort. So that means employees who are engaged are willing to really go the extra mile for an organization, which has a powerful impact on productivity in an organization. And I would like to take a closer look at that. If we look at how engagement impacts productivity, we can identify four distinct factors as in how engagement impacts productivity. Employees work harder, so there's higher output, but not only that, they also are better at their jobs, so that quality as well as quantity of the work improves. Employees are also more innovative, but they're also more focused and motivated, which leads to improved efficiency. All in all, investing in employee engagement really pays off for any organization. As we're looking specifically also at data-driven engagement strategies, I would next like to together take a look at key metrics. How can we go about measuring engagement? Here is a selection of possible metrics that can give you feedback on engagement in an organization. In my organization, I have used some, but not all of them. You obviously need to look at your organization, what's feasible for you, what's realistic, and what gives you the best kind of information. I will talk about a survey tool that we have implemented. I have also used metrics on turnover and absenteeism, both of which are correlated with engagement in organizations. You can use employee feedback, performance reviews, participation. Do you have a lot of volunteers signing up to be part of committees, to volunteer for a good cause with your organization, to be actively involved in any kind of efforts that go outside of their direct responsibilities and roles? That's a good indicator of engagement. Do you get a lot of people put forward, suggested to receive rewards or recognitions? That also happens more frequently in highly engaged organizations. And lastly, you can look at organizational performance metrics. As I said, engagement is correlated with output in organizations, and that will ultimately reflect on organizational performance metrics as well. Here's an overview of my course of action to address engagement issues in our organization. First, I wanted to gather employee feedback in order to really get to the bottom and better understand their specific needs and concerns, in order to be able to effectively address those in the engagement programs I was going to create. I ran focus groups, and I identified a research-backed survey tool. I will go into more details on that in a minute. I identified, like I said, relevant metrics to monitor progress. I then used those insights gained from feedback to implement meaningful programs that are aimed at increasing employee engagement. Measured progress throughout the way And ultimately, all this led to an improved work environment. Here are some key insights that I gathered from speaking with employees in focus groups. The employees expressed some concerns, but also really some wishes moving forward. What should be different in the organization? They felt as if their input really wasn't valued at this point in the organization. They felt differently about the organizational mission. And mind you, we're a nonprofit, and it's really important that employees understand, believe in, and are fired up by our mission as an organization. They felt that leadership decisions could have been communicated more transparently. All this really led to eroded trust in the organization that dampened morale, hindered productivity, and really contributed to that highly increased turnover we were seeing at the time. Employees really wished that there was better communication. They wanted to be heard and actively involved in the organization. They were hoping that we would invest in organizational leadership and wanted to rekindle their passion for our organization's mission. So let's talk a bit more about metrics. In that immediate response phase where turnover was rampant, I actually asked my team to measure turnover on a month-to-month basis to gain some real-time insights into organizational dynamics. We later on moved to that typical annual assessment of turnover as we moved into a more stable environment. I also looked at overtime and absenteeism, and I've provided monthly update reports on a department by department basis to our leaders and supervisors in the organization. These metrics empower departments to have meaningful discussions about engagement with their employees, look at productivity and the overall employee experience. I have also launched continuous improvements efforts by utilizing relevant metrics. And this way we've ensured a data-driven approach to enhancing the work environment. I have selected the Gallup Q12 survey as our employee engagement survey tool. It is a highly research-backed tool, and it really looks at the emotional connections employees have with their workspace, to their commitment and the discretionary efforts, like the SHRM definition points out. It's short, it has 12 key questions, looks at the sense of connection with your colleagues, and whether or not the teams in the organization feel that they're in alignment with the organizational goals. So, of course, there are a lot of very good survey tools out there. There's Culture M, there's Tiny Pulse, there's a broad variety, and you need to find the one that really works for your specific goals and for your specific kind of organization. This one worked for us. Let's talk about the specific engagement programs we launched. I launched 2 committees to engage and involve employees actively in the organization to rekindle their passion for our mission and to really create a sense of purpose for our employees. The Culture Committee was the first one. The Culture Committee shared stories of how we as an organization have positive impacts on our students, really portrayed our talented faculty and the difference they make in students' lives, and how we as an organization have a positive impact on the community at large. What it did is it really renewed the pride of being part of UCLA Extension and increased the employee commitment and a sense of deeper connection to our organization. The second one was an events committee to provide opportunities for employees to forge genuine connections beyond their daily tasks. And by the way, one of the items in the Gallup survey with the highest predictive validity is the item of, I have a best friend at work. While not everybody would call close connections at work a best friend, it is really highly correlated with engagement, whether you feel connected to specific people in the organization. It really pays off, and it really elevates the employee experience if they have opportunities to form deeper connections to coworkers. I also want to talk about the continuous improvement program I started. I used the toolkit from the Gallup Q12 survey to provide each department in our organization with a tailored action planning toolkit to empower teams to take ownership of their work environment. You can make a big difference just focusing on individual teams in the organization and empowering them to select aspects they want to work on from the Gallup survey. I asked teams to regularly present their progress in town hall meetings on a month-to-month basis. I asked that team members, rather than senior leaders or supervisors, step up onto the podium and talk about how their engagement efforts made a difference on their team. In addition to these programs, we also launched rewards and recognition programs to highlight employee achievements in the organization and launched a newsletter to improve internal communication. We kept measuring engagement through the Gallup Q12 survey. Are you curious to see how engagement developed over time? Let's take a look. You can see here that between 2019 and 2021, we were able to achieve a 108% increase in employee engagement. The Gallup survey differentiates between three groups of employees. The green line shows the percentage of employees who are actively engaged in the organization. They want to go the extra mile, put in that extra effort, and they feel fired up by what we do as an organization and why we do it. The yellow line are employees who are neither engaged nor disengaged. They're somewhere in the middle, neutral. They do their job and they probably do a very good job. And the red line are employees who are actively disengaged. What that means is that they are in a pretty bad place and they would like to work against the goals in an organization. And overall, those are extremely encouraging results that indicate that the steps we took and the programs we launched were effective. Additionally, I wanted to mention that between 2018 and 21, turnover decreased from 20% down to 11%. During the same time, absenteeism decreased by 60%. So looking at the data, I think this paints a pretty clear picture that the organization was and still is moving in the right direction. And we should not forget that this really has a real impact on how employees feel about their work environment and their everyday lived realities. Some lessons learned and best practices. I think some key lessons that I'm taking away from this experience is that open communication is incredibly important. Fostering transparency and open dialogue with teams in the organization really supports engagement. Effective leadership was key, working on the individual efforts with our teams, collaborating as an organization on the different committees, and fostering a culture of continuous improvement. All this together fueled engagement in the organization. Let's take a quick look at the future of engagement. I think that we all learned a lot, especially during the last 3 years as people and culture professionals. The experience working remotely, I believe, really offers new opportunities, but also challenges looking at employee engagement. Many of us work in a hybrid manner. Some of us are fully remote. Some of us went back to working in person full time. And each of these different models has different challenges working on employee engagement, customizing engagement activities to that new reality. I think we all learned a lot about mental health, and I believe that that was also a topic in your first keynote this morning. Prioritizing employee well-being is, I believe, more important, and also more, there's a greater demand for these kinds of supporting services than ever before. We are learning a lot about technology these days and how we can perhaps leverage technology for enhanced engagement and communication in organizations. And lastly, and very importantly, we've learned a lot about the value of diversity, equity, and inclusion in organizations, and how really meeting the engagement needs of a very diverse workforce is so very important in each organization. And as HR, we are really at the forefront of shaping the future of employee experience. And we need to emphasize flexibility, adaptability, and innovation. In conclusion, I believe that engagement is really one of the cornerstones of organizational success. It's driven by transparent communication, effective leadership, and collaboration. It's important to make data-driven decisions, and continuous improvement efforts are catalysts for engagement. The future holds really exciting opportunities for evolving engagement strategies. As we close out the keynote for this morning, I encourage you to take these insights and inspiration with you as you navigate your own path towards enhancing engagement in your organization. So we're at 11:21, and this is the end of my presentation, and I am going to take a look at what questions you have submitted in the chat function now and see that we can get to a couple of those. Okay, here's a question. What is the biggest mistake you think companies make when rolling out surveys to gauge engagement? I think that's a very good question. I believe that you can pick the best survey tool probably out there on the market. And again, there are many good ones. And the worst mistake you can make afterwards is not to take action. I've seen it many times in organizations that survey tools were used, perhaps the results were communicated, and then after a certain time, you just measured again. Now, in order to build credibility with the workforce in an organization, it is so important to take their feedback seriously and to use it as a means to take concrete action and to actively involve employees. And I really do believe that transparency is key. Some organizations don't feel comfortable sharing results of employee engagement surveys with their staff. But I do think that engagement really is a team effort, that employees want to be part of the dialogue. And yes, it might sometimes lead to perhaps somewhat difficult conversations, but engagement describes our everyday lived reality. And I do believe that in an organization where you spend so much time together, you need to be able to create a sense of that psychological safety that makes employees feel empowered to also perhaps give critical feedback, to talk about struggling sometimes, to talk about things that are not going well. And I think that, again, taking concrete action and creating transparency around survey results are both extremely important. If you don't do that, I think that is a surefire way to burn even the best survey tool. what advances or cautions do you have for communicating with management on engagement issues and strategies? That's a good question. I think it's important to, number one, anticipate potential concerns that your senior leaders in the organization may have. One of them, for example, is, oh, how do we deal with critical feedback from surveys? How do we communicate results in the organization? How can we maybe save face if the results are not good for our team? And have good answers and supportive answers. I think that it's important to empathize with their concerns and to understand that these are difficult conversations that no one has truly been trained or prepared for, even as a leader, to have with their teams. So having that support ready and anticipating concerns and also having good answers for them, helping them to prepare to have conversations with their teams on engagement, preparing how to use the survey tool, how to use the implementation toolkit, how to launch continuous improvement efforts with their teams, and encourage them to turn engagement into a recurring topic of conversations in team meetings throughout the year. That engagement work is never done, rather, it is ongoing in the organization. Here's a question on hybrid work. We are struggling with engagement in our hybrid workforce, especially with fully remote workers. Any ideas? That's a tough one. It is. So our organization worked fully remote for a couple of years during the pandemic, like probably so many of us did. Now we are working as a hybrid organization. We work in person between 1 and 3 days a week, depending on what kind of job you have. And I do not have a perfect answer yet. I feel like all of us are learning as we implement our new work models of remote, hybrid, or perhaps again, fully in-person work, depending on what we do. Some best practices that I've learned throughout the past couple of years: you need to make sure to really include your remote workers, and that is sometimes harder than it sounds. So all too easily, perhaps informal communication happens on the premises. You make decisions on the fly between those who are there, and remote workers tend to have less opportunities to be an active participant in those informal conversations. So as you look at engagement programs, you need to pay specific attention to remote workers and how you can make sure that they are actively included. For instance, part of our onboarding initiative was a virtual buddy program where each new hire, remote or in person or hybrid, has been assigned a buddy in the organization to really form a relationship with a person outside of your team early on after joining the organization. That was so important to make our team members feel connected in the organization, to learn more outside of the formal knowledge that is typically conveyed in an employee orientation or onboarding program, to understand what the culture is like, who to turn to if you have troubles, who's not your boss or your direct colleague in the organization. Think about that. Think about events. How can you make events that are virtual, that are fun, that are really inclusive, specifically also for remote workers in the organization? So those are some strategies that I felt made a positive difference in our organization. But of course, it can vary, and the needs can vary really depending on your specific orientation. And with that, I believe we are at time. So thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Ketrin, for that insightful and practical presentation. What a fabulous keynote. Thank you. I also want to thank everyone else for joining us today for this session. This session, along with all of today's content, will be available on demand following the event. Thank you again, Ketrin.